There are a couple of other management issues I want to address and I referred to in the module, but I want to follow up on them. And one of these is the fact that in Grand Teton National Park, it's very unusual for a national park in that there are actually some private lands within the boundaries of the national park. And as far as I know, that's the only national park in that way. And it goes back to how the park was formed. You may recall that in that area, the Jackson Hole area, that John D. Rockefeller Jr. had bought up parcels there and then eventually donated those to the park system, and the park was established in 1950. But he was not able to buy up all of that land, and so there were some ranchers that held out and never sold out, and even when the park was formed, were allowed to basically keep that land or grandfather into the national park. And that initially was supposed to be a 50-year lease. That lease ran out in around the year 2000 or so. And then that was just extended indefinitely. So I personally think that was a mistake, and I know that wouldn't have been great for the individuals involved, but it probably would have been a good time to go ahead and buy those people out, because those people have been running cattle in the ecosystem for a long time, and they do have rights within not only the national park, which is unusual to run cattle, but also in some of the peripheral lands to run cattle. And there are a lot of different ranchers who lease the national forest land for cattle grazing as well. So in terms of this ecosystem, again, I consider it a very unique ecosystem for the diversity of life that we see there, but especially, this is one of the few areas in the lower 48s where we have grizzly, a substantial grizzly population. We've reintroduced a wolf, and it's very, very, very successful there. And so part of the problem in terms of them being able to expand their territory, increase numbers, increase genetic diversity, is the fact that they run into humans as they work around the periphery of the ecosystem. And part of the human interaction is an economic interaction. So if wolves and grizzlies are feeding on cattle, that's impacting the ranchers there, and the ranchers have a lot of political pull in the area. So they are residents, they're electing officials, they're contributing to the political campaigns of the officials there. So they do have a lot of political power. Even though if you look perhaps at the total amount of money that they generate for that area and for the state, I don't think it compares to the amount of tourism that comes into the area, and that's actually a much bigger part of the economy. And people come to that area for the grizzlies and for the wolves. So I think we're at a kind of an interesting point right now, because there are a number of lawsuits being brought by environmental organizations to prohibit cattle grazing in the entire ecosystem in the national forests around Yellowstone Park. And fortunately, most of the individuals within the Grand Teton National Park have voluntarily agreed to stop running cattle inside the park boundaries. However, most of them are running cattle outside the park boundaries. So I think these are going to be an interesting series of lawsuits, because it's beginning to force the National Forest Service to look at its own management. Traditionally, it has been funded through the Department of Agriculture, so it is considered an ecosystem or a federal land that is to produce a product. It's basically the agriculture of trees. However, it is also a resource land for plants and, in this case, animals. And so these lawsuits are making them look at management of the national forests in terms of a greater and broader scope rather than just timber, so beyond just timber. And to take into account the fact that there is a lot of habitat destruction that goes along with grazing of cattle, and that has not been accounted for in the environmental studies that have been done on the area properly. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think there is some possibilities that there may be some negotiations to begin to reduce cattle grazing through the ecosystem. I don't know if we'll ever get it completely out of the national forest in the area, but I think this is an important concept. It is an important trend, because unless you can decrease the number of cattle being grazed, you're just not going to be able to expand habitat for grizzly and wolves. And if we can't expand habitat, we can't expand numbers. So interesting management issue. We'll see what happens down the line.